You're unmuted now.
We're still waiting on a judge, right?
Yeah, and
I think they're on the internet though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think he's there.
Yeah, Coleman is here.
Oh, okay.
I think Irma is figuring out the Wi-Fi.
Gotcha.
Anybody can find anything that reminds them of the password, that would really help.
I think we got emailed it to us. So
I will check the invite.
I know it's some places.
it's
My phone.
the username is Davis MK13 at gmail.com. Password is 266012. It's for JD visitors.
Steps away now. I'll be right back. That microphone, the one that's.
Yep. Yes. Please.
Is everyone ready? Let's start.
Advantage when its economic development, the Supreme Court's ruling in Epigram denied standing to foreign plaintiffs seeking remedy for antitrust injuries sustained by Covenant 11 and Epigram. The court limited access to American court platform plaintiffs under Sherman based on foreign transaction joint company until the statute should not needed for the post opportunity foreign plaintiffs to show the platform participation that would be injured. The claims would still be barred. FDA calls for approximate causation between domestic effects and foreign injury. The standard is proved for a period of foreign plaintiffs. Gaps in enforcement and the presumption against extraterritoriality leave much of the global south vulnerable to anti-competitive predation. Michael 16. Ecuador, Panama, and Ukraine representatives less developed countries do not have effective antitrust splitting and effective competition regimes to fill regulatory gaps. The global south now yet have such regimes or even dealing with international cartel license building gets issues in enforcing laws of factors constrain countries onto whatever hostile political, legal, environmental, limitation, legal culture, undeveloped markets. Enforcement is exacerbated with transboundary cartels. Instead, foreign plaintiffs are encouraged to rely on trickle-down enforcement for more developed antitrust regimes, which creates impunity for transboundary and multinational cartels, merchants, and 21 economies. This is important from the violators' perspective. Face an uphill and equal battle, challenging colonists of other countries are recommended to rely the efforts were reaching not violation on difference with the impact of religious continuation. On-site underlies gaps there may be no benefit to countries of enforcement transnational violations. Trinity constant greater harmony the outflow of wealth, preventing growth, and destroys leaders active competing. Any sectors really lead to harmony, enforcing jurisdiction. There is reason not to continue with new anti-competitive arrangements. Cartels undermine good faith market competition. That's a precondition for current economic development. Buchan Winisha 21. Competition encourages firms to innovate to achieve on-road trends instead of advantages or R&D. Differentiation and capital cost efficiency search for advantages, throughout economic growth, employment, and welfare, sustainable growth is an effect on income, reduce poverty, firms competing for advantages, take a crucial role. Growth is on need to be source of return over the long-term pollution. This market failure reinforced for negatively affecting prices, outputs, and innovation resource or delivery, which was a significant increase for attributed to pollution. One essential feature of competition is efficient competition. Law cartels, inter-customers, restricting and production or reducing R&D. These negatively affect growth and antitrust private forces with harmful and destroying violation of good faith market competition is a minimum requirement for long-term sustainable growth and helps reduce poverty and improve standard living. The upside of market competition outweighs and solves all causes to economic development. Committee 7. A persistent challenge is how to foster sustainable development. Competition includes moving to world competition competitive markets, higher levels of growth and lower poverty. Competition prevents accountability, transparency, the company's relation, reducing corruption, lobbying, and seeking broad-based participation and sharing of the benefits of the competition firms earn access and real political influence. Differences decreasing competition. One of the critical sanitary factors economies are prevented from achieving the potential anti-competitive practices. Sustainable development diffuses the confluence of threats to global security, extinction. UNSC 17 development must be the center of all efforts to address changes emerging in threats to perils of nuclear weapons or hardly climate change. Multiple conflicts no longer with groups linked with the threat of terrorism. Development is one of the best instruments for sustainable development. Help build peace societies for other parties. Maintain more flexible positions for a conflict by pushing situations to the point of no return to constant instability and conflict. Include underdevelopment independently. Development deflates wars globally. Core Red 16 connections between development and peace are firmly supported by research. Every study finds a strong connection between income and armed conflict. Link is one of the most robust empirical relationships in economic literature. Wars associated with lack of development and recent growth may be the single most important step to reduce our conflict, specifically the Middle East. Sluggish growth perpetuates proxy conflicts. In all 19 conflicts, build hundreds of thousands of displaced millions in Libya, Syria, Yemen, states, and the Middle East have become proxy participants in these conflicts. The decentric explanation of this important realities, economic motivations, for the period of expenditory power for armed conflict profits, incentives coming with narratives of agreements in the larger economy and equal distribution generates violent mobilization. Economic motivation play a critical role in the persistence of fighting and violence and coercion. Middle East conflicts escalate to World War III. 18 armed conflicts in the Middle East pose the greatest risk to world peace. The situation is to unstable states and armed troops. The regime most powerful countries actively involved. The U.S. supported troops fighting Russian interior troops. We have regional powers. We have an explosive mix of major protagonists directly involved. There's no guarantee will not escalate to worldwide conflict. The plan solves reinvigorating antitrust enforcement in the Middle East, unlocks sweeping economic improvements. World Bank 19, a powerful way to invigorate many economies would be to inject competition that would create efficient economic competition. This powerful tool for ensuring firms to invest in research and development. Competition leads to productivity. And esteemed developing countries must undertake effective antitrust law. Many countries lack antitrust regulation. Weak enforcement is a major problem. Strong antitrust action can unleash substantial tech advances, lack of adjustability, slow pace of tech adoption, which are growth lacks cartel enforcement, devastates Latin American development. Supplanting competition will itself. World Bank 21, 300 cartels have been revealed in markets abroad. Key inputs to firms' cartel activity affects a significant share of the economy. Taking into account cartel agreements at the upstream level to pervasiveness of economic activities in this 10-volt injection rates and LEC movie cartels will move with effective projects to be competitive benefits of trade liberalization. Do you know materialist public resources of cartel enforcement will be 38 times more effective in tackling poverty and smaller economies where connectivity or central growth cartels may cover the sake of right fewer public goods and services. Cartels can even distort government bonds. Economic cartels undermine public trust in market economies and the FCC consumers benefit from preventive anti-cartel enforcement. However, LEC countries do not have tools to destroy cartels. LEC economic volatility causes democratic erosion and backsliding. Rebuttal 21. Latin America is experiencing deep economic contraction, polarization, democratic erosion before the pandemic. Latin America was vulnerable to social trauma and simple frustration, low quality services, and inequality. Latin America's middle class and the poverty of poverty for economic justice, taking intense creating openings for radical figures. The region is beset by backsliding for mutations aid. Governments influence domestic turmoil, fueling isolationism and anti-globalism. Regional democratic backsliding enables Russia and China to spread authoritarianism globally. France 19 governments create a block of actors of post-American power. China's presence is growing. Russia's right to support autocratic rulers. Russian and China's religious Latin American countries self-dominate global influence and supporting autocratic regimes. Over making sure the remains ideological safe for authoritarianism. The influence of Latin America broadly. The recent Trump is taking up democracy. Democratic failure cascades and causes nuclear war, dominating globalist world models cascading across borders. We're going to globally conscious of reduce face failing states. Famine, genocide, state collapse, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, civil war, the main threats from authoritarianism. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea were ISIS by supporting democracy. These geopolitical warning. No democracy is ever going to war. Ever is not democracy. Supporting terrorism, proliferating. WMD advantage to its resource cartels. International cartels devastate competition in metals and minerals markets. Cruciate all 14 companies attempts to manipulate prices until I remain a significant threat to metals markets. There were 15 cases of antitrust authorities and coverage attempts to formulate an international private cartels. Mining metals hardcore cartels could be the tip of the iceberg of manipulated practices in the sector that undermines efficiency innovations necessary to relieve stress on the environment and global resource production. Cruciate all 14 global prosperity and security dependent upon sustainable volatility, pressure on resource production, managing environmental stress, commerces of land for such over resources, attempt to manipulate prices or cover markets or pass down to consumer technology to unlock a resource efficiency revolution, advance low carbon energy dependent, the affordability, minerals, specialty minerals play a growing role for resource efficient low carbon technologies, price flexible, the diffusion of technology for electric vehicles and wind turbines, so pretty space to regulate supply chains across continent sources, market discourse include clandestine private cartels, climate driven resource shocks, cause extinction, clear the chain, significant reduction of vital resources, augment clean pressure pressures as historically other conflict solutions like these climate change, and resource scarcity, melding reality on the cusp of the world dominated by shortages of affordable resources, natural resource shocks, sources, attempts to democratize race regime, instability, aggravation, unbridled consumption, natural resources, could reduce global extraction of human chaos and conflict, and international ag cartels dominate the industrial food chain, hammering global food security. ETC 13 agro-industrial corporation consolidate control of agricultural inputs for the industrial food chain for energy, genetics, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, using engines to drive industrial agricultural cartels are commonplace. The market is neither free nor healthy. It's time to just competition. Plus, to consider measures to defend global food security. The visible hold of the market is growing. Corporations dominate agricultural R&D will influencing trade, aid, and agricultural policies, anti-competitive practices pose a threat to public health and security. Food wars, nuclear COVID-19, the nature of nuclear home to increase the modernization of the state reset that reset the highest risk humanity. It is ever shown with world resources of food under our system to be reliant on weapons of the Syrian war and agriculture failure and strife to nuclear economy remains the same possibility. Association in the Middle East as these are already stressed and food of the nuclear fires, multiplying pandemic regimes will play atomic weapons as well. Entry by refugees fleeing famine, insecurities, driving the preconditions for the use of nuclear weapons. Solvency. Plan the United States federal government to essentially increase prohibitions on anti-competitive private cartel practices in cases where foreign plaintiffs cannot secure adequate relief in alternative fora. The plan permits jurisdiction over immigrant type cases only in instances where foreign plaintiffs don't have an alternative form for recovering damages that maximizes cartel deterrence through harmonization of antitrust and preserves judicial economy. Schmidt 6. A better approach with systematized review of countries' antitrust regimes and the termination categories the restriction with respect to the adjudication. Review antitrust regimes to bar jurisdiction in cases which the plaintiff or defendant is a national defender of the rights and adequate proper remedy in the antitrust claim section. Exercise recognize the predicts plaintiffs an opportunity relief necessary to ensure international cartels of such claims to be better heard before foreign court should decline jurisdiction because of convenience and judicial economy. The use of have a national policy with respect to jurisdictions such as the consistent predictable facility to trade plaintiffs and defendants would know whether jurisdiction could be exercised. Plaintiffs from countries the U.S. deems effective would have no reason to bring a case in U.S. courts and would turn to their home jurisdiction policy would encourage other jurisdictions to enact policy in harmony with the U.S. jurisdiction may cause lawmakers to tear down measures protecting such cartels if we wish to protect from America's trouble damages. America's trouble damages would provide an incentive for foreign companies to lobby countries to enact antitrust policies sufficiently strong to remove them from U.S. jurisdiction and immigrant type suits. This approach will harmonize antitrust do so and that most effectively deters international cartels. I might get a few extra cards. Only international private antitrust enforcement maximizes deterrence and enhances the cartel's likelihood of being detected, makes operation in multiple countries cost prohibitive. Schmidt 6. Private litigation is particularly effective as consumers may be among the first entities to detect cartels and awarding damage and make a legal cost prohibitive. Private litigation is important for maximum deterrence. Plaintiffs help alert authorities violation damage and private suits which are probability cartel will be detected as increase the penalty imposed. Cartel must overcome challenges to operate successfully. Legal actions force them to operate secretly to avoid detection and place. Council states economists to conclude the cartels are inherently stable. Cartels overcome inherently running super competitive profits of their members who effectively destroy cartels and to totally expected penalty must equal super competitive profits for participating in the cartel because international cartel enjoys profits from other countries. Expected penalty depends on the sum of expected penalties. Each cartel will raise the risk of the use, even though doing some cases likely detection. International cartel will harm consumers because it can offset American losses super competitive profits from countries where it has little fear of penalty. Only the ass bottom-up harmonization fills enforcement gaps that must precede any effort to develop an international antitrust regime. Smith 6. My proposal is consistent with the desire to see some global antitrust authority. There's disagreement as to whether the communication is adopted with this actual oversight body or could a world court the US and the EU occupy time which really puts sister disagreement these negotiating such a good details will be devil's international antitrust such a distant possibility for proposal and privilege to disaster where the industry community needs to fill in first and gaps reversal best mechanism for exercising jurisdiction over claims like this or laws for relief to use provide relief to US implicitly encourages countries to implement and enforce laws that apart such relief other nations objections to be multiplied by the fact that judges are taking a limit American power through jurisdiction over standing such disagreements will precisely such disagreements are not created by the US reflect real policy differences between trading allies. All right, Thumper, the DOJ Section 2 suits has fundamentally changed course and opened up to charging criminal cases for the first time in 50 years. Notice that all 3.3 DOJ is looking to break new ground by bringing criminal charges under term. The DOJ will use all available tools to hopefully get anti-competitive conduct. The AD will using all criminal statutes to its anti-competitive behavior. Criminal. The AD is not charged with criminal Section 2 case since the 1970s, so it's much as a significant change in DOJ practice.
I'll sum that up quick. Should be sent.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the warrant for why the plan causes harmonization?
So the plan makes it so that countries without developed people from countries without developed antitrust regimes can sue in U.S. courts. The result is because those firms would seek to avoid treble damages in U.S. courts, they would have an incentive to lobby their own nations to enact antitrust policies.
Why do those nations comply?
Well, because you mean comply with the lobbying. It's a similar thing from like they also want to be able to capture the gains from fining those companies instead of the United States. So they have a monetary incentive to do it.
Okay. The Latin America scenario, like Russia's, dealing with some Ukraine stuff. Why are they playing around in Latin America?
Well, we don't think that. Well, I think that if anything, that strengthens our impacts because Russia has an incentive to attempt to get the U.S. off balance by intervening in its near abroad. So,
okay, so your argument is, Russia and China, they just don't like the U.S.
Also, our thing is not really like they intervene in Latin America so much as they promote autocracy. Our evidence says backsliding would cause.
The US definitely has like a better history of not promoting dictatorships in Latin America.
I think that our evidence indicates that the best path for Latin America is one of democratization. Of course, one that is non-interventionist, which is why the plan is justified. Economic development is the best way of promoting that, and that's what the 1AC has been pretty explicit about.
Yeah, fair. The diamond card, what do democracies do to solve famine?
Those famines can be imposed by autocrats because they lack public oversight. Autocratic regimes are structurally more brittle and unstable because they lack external accountability. So they've less of an incentive to pursue effective but potentially costly policies to secure.
Well, I guess like if people don't have food, they're not going to be happy. Why do autocrats like not care about food?
Well, that's the whole thing. Autocrats are insulated from public pressure, unlike Democrats.
What?
Or
Like,
Democrats,
why?
democracies,
Why?
because autocrats are not elected.
Okay, but they're okay. The Middle East scenario, I guess the economies of multiple countries have gone in the tanker. Why have we not seen escalation?
Which countries, which economies, what
Like
context?
Afghanistan remain stable or like not escalate to this nuclear conflict or what?
COVID generally.
Yeah.
Well, our evidence says
Iran.
that whether that COVID translates into sustained sluggish growth is whether cartels
2019.
collude to price gouge in those nations.
Your cards from like 2019 and 2018 are like COVID didn't bump.
Our card says that sustained decline and stagnation and a failure of growth. It's not about one-shot recessions, but slow growth structurally undermining regime stability.
6, advantage 1, or sorry, advantage 2, advantage 1. Cool. Coleman's good to go. Arnold's good. All right, cool. I'm gonna start unless anyone has any objection. First off is T-scope. Scope is the extent of the area developed by the core laws of Trinity 9. The competition law collect info on the breadth of the law scope, providing description of scope, competition law, and evaluation of its quality. Scope is not measure how the law is enforced or the independence or quality of the law. It's bounded by exemptions and immunities. Crucial 19, the handbook of the scope of the interest laws is addressing the scope of the interest laws. The scope is defined in terms of exemption and immunities. It's statutory, non-statutory doctrines, directly affect application extent of the laws. Expand with big or expand to not merely clarify existing principles. The act specifies the application of antitrust to already covered activities. It's not curtail and exemption or immunity. Vote neg, eliminating exemptions and immunities by the limited critical basis for prep and focuses based on the balance between antitrust and regulation, ensuring conceptual unity. The FTC counterpoint of the United States federal government should promulgate and enforce a rule prohibiting on anti-competitive private cartel practices in cases where foreign plans cannot secure adequate relief alternative for as non-competitive competition within the scope of Section 5 Federal Trade Commission Act and determine that such practices are outside the scope of the Sherman and Clayton Act. That's the Federal Trade Commission Act promulgated the tool on Chevron difference grounds. Counterpoint solves the Houston 18. The law and ancient fair to interpret Section 5 Congress intended to imply with one provisions Sherman and Clayton Act and revitalize FTC Chevron deference. Houston 18 Chevron critical elements to cause the legislative power to minister state certification certain to receive deference. Words of the competition allow for interpretation. For an example of Chevron is time solves drug pricing. Fox and first 21 is time the apprentice useful authority that Congress given Section 5 can use Section 5 authority to pursue such pricing of drugs. Impact is 1 million deaths in a decade. The cost 21.1 million to make patients die over the next decade because they can't afford to pay for medications. Researchers found developed a 10-year model. The advantage counterpoint the United States federal government should substantially increase foreign development into the Middle East and Latin America based on consultation with local stakeholders. Substantially increase research development of climate technology and export to Latin America and the Middle East. First, Plain cell advantage 1, economist 14. The factor that affects A dispersed, but not correlated with growth after countries escape poverty. Donors cut handouts, which pedal takes a toll on growth. For every 1% of income, country receives an aid growth rise to 30%. Second place self advantage 2, sit around 20. Robotics and quantum are so rich intended that small companies being no company resource to invest in interest. Public R&D government has been drive innovation through R&D. Public investment outside profit covers wider should lead to innovations otherwise undiscovered. The DOJ trade-off. This said DOJ is effectively solving ransomware now. Mansky 324. Recently, there has been he's transferred a law enforcement seized $3 billion in crypto data. Successes mean activities not as rampant globally. Reduced attacks, prosecution have an impact. It's because of DOJ resource focus. Hill 21 just first announced bring all the department's resources bear to combat ransomware. Is paired with bring full resources. Plan trades off for 21. DOJ led resources may trade off simple matters to challenge or walk away from cybercrime forces key to prevent infrastructure collapse and nuclear war. Well, we're in 21. Biden said U.S. into real war with powers cyber to blame. Ransomware is one of the main cyber assaults tiptoeing to war. The court clogged this head. Federal courts fear a clog of private antitrust suits. They manage procedural floodgates. Turn 3. Federal judges fear floodgates litigation. The floodgates are recurs and force the antitrust law. The court could fear that the courts will be flooded with antitrust litigation in cases of establishing new right of action. That hurts federal plaintiffs, including past actions. So 10 antitrust cautionary tales that open floodgates to interest claims. Fair plaintiffs in the short temporal wise before system reacts quarterly works with antitrust is thus misguided. Key self overfishing. Home at all 14 informed beyond the enforcement through federal class action marketers make green claims thus determined do not violate consumer protection laws. Simply forcing up consumer protection through civil class of action consumers protect quality regulators on the ground and agriculture. Extinction. Self 16. Comparability of marine life to feed by comparability of marine life to feed if oceans that we will not survive. Decay. U.S. competition policy is animated by imperial motives to contain and exploit China and other peripheral countries. The act enables a permanent economic war against the developing world, which ensures escalation and social collapse. Positing the U.S. as a neutral economic competitor against an imperialist cheating China pushes towards the brink. It incentivizes global imperial violence to maintain the U.S.'s position as a manager of the global economy. Saying Parliament 21. Left intellectuals observing to Robbie, the secret by U.S. imperial charting hegemony here linked and affirms U.S. posture as defensive. U.S. aggression maintain corporate regulations to centuries. One project of U.S. Pacific hegemony consolidate and expand in terms of hostile posture towards China. The U.S. permanent war in Asian level is product of U.S. hegemony war in the Philippines, the Ecuador Empire, the Indo-Pacific region, the primary theater of U.S. militarism, commercial orientalism, and anti-migration capitalism, and Pacific expansion, free trade imperialism, deployed by the United States under a foreign policy paradigm describes imperial intercolonialism against on China, where reflects the open door imperialism. The United States negotiated the 1844 treaty between American spy land fixed tariffs on trade. The third gun policy. The other policy was an articulation of free trade imperialism. Imperialism defining the U.S. empire, capitalist expansion, and commercial penetration. China's objection to capital imperial regulation of the nature of imperialism, open door obscuring use of imperialist force, power, national capitalism to make its greatest crucial experiment, and the exploitation of China by financial capital, and that we prepared the grounds for war. Calls for China's economy to continue free trade imperialism. Description of China's holding force basic question imperialism. Essentially, as charges wielded through human rights courts or then U.S. escalation are economics, Future Competition Act, curb subsidization of private sector, and monitor anti-competitive policies. Bill warrants freeze the United States out of the market. Free trade depends on the forcing us open stipulations on China's economic policy or purpose of forcibly opening China Western capital cap warfare, putting on debates globalization and market access, hearken to China's century of humiliation, but neoliberal development has categorized corporate regulation in the post-war era of Chinese sovereignty and checks on foreign capital represent the frustration of China's open door. U.S. trade aggression leads to dismantle of exports. China seems to from countries whose industrialization has been predicated on being open penetration by the imperialist triad. Development program sees the appearance on the personal path. U.S. business China as a cheater, monetary orientals as India being disciplined. 90% of cases where directed against China's state-owned industries are embarrassed to foreign ownership. Imperialist coercion is massive, and language of competition and industry alliances are seen as legally and commercial China being disciplined by the U.S. rules-based of order complaints finding corporate renegotiations. China sided with developing world and development rights subsidies. China's authoritative legalized agricultural diplomacy ruled in favor of the U.S. complaining against agricultural subsidies that provided critical stability. China's 450 million agricultural workers erosion sparked mass protests. Is now China would form alliance with global countries, economic geopolitical realities, and notion of inter-imperial robbery trade aggression focused on the industry to China seems to sound requirement China's state capacity of prime target attempts to undermine industrial modernization are not about inter-imperial robbery, but of imperial trade aggression that try to maintain the nation size of resource extraction, consolidation, U.S. military aid, crucial Germany's kind of China's rise, bears all these historical patterns of the 19th century. Military command and sovereignty of nation stepping stones, sex violence, equal statutory self possession. This posture repacks violence against imperial national liberty, unitization, and sovereignty confers the pivot to Asia with multiple aggressive movements opposing anti rule. Direct can secure the U.S. militarization poses possibly the door to with China market page, U.S. in the global infrastructure manifest in containment programs. Competitive markets are inherently contradictory and crisis prone. Harvey 14 monopoly power test be presented as the partial equilibrium independent market that's used supported by antitrust as with the bias for monopoly competition state action central to capitalist economy. This concept is liberal economic theory. Monopoly power is additional to the capital or existing country unit competition. Capitalist for monopoly power monopoly correlates to change and competition. The standard story of strict monopoly power. International competition creates downward pressure on wage balancing. Monopoly competition keeps cyclical. Capital offsets between ruinous effects of competition and excessive monopolies. Crisis in the 1970s was a crisis of monopoly. Inflation crisis in 1930s produced by the currency of pure oligopoly by then the power divided for competition. Fierce competition electoral wasteland. Space barriers diminished. Local industries lost protections. And monopoly privileges, capitalists find other ways to preserve monopoly, market monopoly, financialization, and unstable ag make gold prices inevitable until the 18th. Countries of stagnation, job security, indebtedness, poverty, lack of access, basic death, depletion of resources, loss by diversity, climate change, represents overconsumption, capitalist driven production, sustainability, capital production, climate proposed consumption sustained, recent lending, improves your obsolescence, counties, reducing fatigues, constant fatal contradiction, means to keeping the cost down, having passed to supply the futures of doing stocks, search for substitute in the bioeconomy, use production, KC, accumulation, corporate supply, the crisis, neoliberalism, generated unacceptable crisis, short term imbalances by community capital production, overproduced commodities are described in the crisis of 2007, super exploitation of workers, when they resist the food crisis, capitalists and 18 basis source of subsistence for one global population, ability to purchase items, its Linked to debt, financial crisis and its consequences start creating have to be removed. Only a matter of time for another financial crisis might mark another financial crisis. The alternative endorses a socialist model of development. Nielsen 19. The new model delivered recurring crises. Revised model breaks the foreground creative knowledge and practice central to make a better world. The social progressive model imagines collaborative, positive, social cooperation states with stable and social progressive modes of local production. A post-medieval counter-hegemonic model needs to directly contest competition by offering a localized alternative. Such project requires ideological inspiration of any does mutual. Advantage 2. The ag scenario was backwards. The U.S. model drives unstable agriculture.
No, do one. The first thing.
Reserve solve, mining risk level, main risk cost, creating idle 21. Are the deputies with traditional reserves are plentiful, but future supplies mined in the DRC, concentrated vulnerable to risk and extraction, processing, or manufacturing power, with challenging increased demand for metals, could risk cost, mine development could restrict supply and slow investment.
Food defense.
No food or resource war scenarios. Beer 11. Shortages are common in sub-Saharan countries. Wars are not. Regression analysis found. Conflicts are like a country was poor, but independent of the war, but not separate shortages. And as they given a large number of rabbit share, concluded those who perceive doom because of scarcity have little support. Advantage 1. The U.S. is the primary driver of Middle East instability. Albang and Odom 19. And through the text of contradiction and contradiction media is probably growth championed by Washington. Cycles trigger dispossession and displacement in the region. They sparked a lot of time crisis with the world migration can. Cycles and crises. COVID thumps or disproves their impact variance from 2019 to 2018. What do you see Eames as inequalities will cause Middle East war in all 19? Case study research showed that the province that are spoken with narrative created and embedded in a larger political planning. Hard to debate was time for the mobilization civil war, distribution of power, and resourcing groups are conditions for power mobilization. Middle East war won't escalate till 2018. Middle East instability has been a 30-year stretch. At the same time, the U.S. is no longer willing or able to play the external role before yet. Rolling waters has not solved the whole system. The power politics of the region tilt towards bouncing Iran as proxies and the Saudi-led Sunni bloc. Statecraft can continue to reduce regional instability over time. No Russia meddling. They're not doing anything Latin America while they're in Ukraine. China model internally turns of Latin America offense. Chen 20. There's more clear articulate conception of the world order of sort of multi-dynamic cooperation in order to replace the one improvement. She presented 5 aspects: that compensation, common security, common prosperity, win and cooperation, medical relations, enlarge the wide gap between necessity and goal governance capacity as far as the adjustment of the international order. China would still find many like-minded partners to address regional global challenges such as regional security, nuclear proliferation, climate change, sustainable development. Regardless, the world's unlikely to embrace national isolationism. China's very sure because the world needs UN and many aspects of the order. China's groups have stronger relations in relation to unilateral U.S. leadership. Market unilateral U.S. leadership. Open for cross. I got the first somewhere.
All right, everyone good?
Yep.
Status of the off.
All conditional.
Can you click planks?
No.
T. Empigran held that foreign cartels are exempt from antitrust. What's the violation?
We disagree with that assessment. We think that Empigran made it more hard to bring a case, but did not hold that they're exempt.
Okay. FTC counterplan. What's the impact of this Chevron stuff?
The drug pricing, in fact. Millions of people die.
Okay. Yeah. Can you read the part about Fox and First that says Chevron?
It's talking about how the FTC needs to use its full authority under Section 5. That's referring to Chevron.
Okay. And the part that just says like it solves it.
That's what Fox and First
And
says.
the line.
It can use Section 5 authority to pursue excessive pricing of drugs.
Right. The DOJ trade-off DA. There's a line from this one's the evidence. Quote, DOJ successes don't mean ransomware is going away anytime soon. I don't even have a question.
Our response is that the evidence is pretty clear that the DOJ is what's keeping those attacks manageable, and our evidence is explicit about that.
The critique, how does the alternative, is this a pick?
No.
How does the alt prevent the military from occupying the Pacific?
I don't know, that's not our immediate question. I think our immediate question is we provided a different model of development besides yours. We are impact turning liberalization.
So the alternative is not mutually exclusive with occupying the Asia Pacific?
Well, neither is yours. I don't really know what that argument really gets. I think our argument is that we provide a different model that does not unleash waves of imperialist liberalization.
Okay, this tag is positing the US is neutral against a cheating China. Where did we say China was cheating?
Yeah, we have 2 responses to that. The first one is that we'll make a general argument that the app is trying to force liberalization. Your explanation of solvency and wanting to see cross-ex is that we force people to lobby their governments to open access to Western markets. So that process is explicitly described in this piece of evidence. Second is that we'll say the app does result in attacks against China. And we'll make that link argument explicit in the block.
Is there any reason why competitive markets are inherently monopoly prone that isn't solved by just
having the government.
Yes,
block
we think that
monopoly growth?
cartel enforcement is one example of monopolization, but can never be the entirety of it.
Well-
And the reason is that capitalists always pursue profit through monopoly.
It's also not just that, like, it's inevitable. It's that competition also has its own side of crises that you just ignore and assume that centralization is bad and decentralization is good. I think
For
Harvey is
example-
explicit
So,
that its impact.
That's fine. How does that, so it seems like one of the things is like, there's a capital unsustainability, capital's consuming a bunch of resources. How does the alternative dramatically reduce resource consumption?
It would be a different model of development that does not require intensive
Competition.
growth to maintain itself.
10, start.
Oh, okay.
So put it in the home folder picture.
Okay, it's there.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
$6.50. Yeah, go for it. My water. I'm still that standby. There are a couple people that left Coleman, so it'll be a second.
How's your NDT been going?
Not too bad. Be better. Yours?
obviously safe.
Okay, while everybody's getting that up, the order will be advantage 1, advantage 2. So back in the 1AC order. Topicality exemptions. The FTC section 5 counterplan. The advantage counterplan. The court clog disadd. The DOJ disadd. And then the critique. Does anybody want that one more time? It's the same order as the doc.
Give me 1 second. Can I get that? Okay. T 5 advantage counterplan. Yeah, I got it.
And then court clog DOJ. Yeah.
Got it.
Anyone not good? Conceded sustainable development impacts solves a myriad of global crises by dampening armed conflict. That's the core right evidence. Their argument that the U.S. is a driver of instability does not assume that the U.S. model of competition has successfully deterred both war and inequality. The group, the COVID and inequality arguments, is not about a one-shot recession, but about the systemic resilience and the ability to deal with those crises. Yes, the East impact causes extinction, unstable pricing conflicts, ensures escalation, draws in nuclear powers, which is the counter evidence there. No escalation argument doesn't assume the conversions of economic conditions with ethnic crises that already exist. Yes, democracy impacts solves extinction, prevents civil war, state collapse, nuclear proliferation, and terrorism, which is the diamond evidence. Maybe Russia is exporting a model now, but they've conceded democratic peace theory and that authoritarianism is systemically more conflict prone, which means that only we have an internally to an impact. Now go to advantage 2. Resource wars cause extinction, global war from scarcity-driven conflict. That's the clear evidence there. Evidence about reserves doesn't assume that the minerals exist and can be extracted, but they're being bottlenecked by price gouging and resource hoarding in the status quo by anti-competitive behavior. Yes, their resource wars defense does not assume the convergence of climate change that makes conflicts over minerals more likely. They've independently conceded food wars that go nuclear through regime instability and refugee flows, which is the crib evidence T. We meet the planning expands the territorial scope of the Sherman Act. Popovsky and 8 protecting American citizens from international crisis requires giving the Sherman Act some extra territorial scope. Emigran limited the territorial scope of the Sherman Act through narrow interpretations of the FTA. Popovsky and 8 Emigran the court concluded that applying the Sherman Act would be unprecedented. FTA was designed to limit and expand the Sherman Act scope. Expanding the scope of the Sherman Act includes expanding the category of the cases that it applies to. Popovsky and 8 the territorial reach of the Sherman provision presents a question of jurisdiction. The scope of the Sherman Act to deal with the subject matter jurisdiction of the federal courts in cases arising under Sherman counter interpretation. Next includes clarification, not amendment. Washington Court of Appeals and 4 canon argues that reason the word expand the legislature indicates it amended rather than clarified. We disagree. Prefer one is overlimiting. They make the topic still collapsing it to only exemptions. No one wants to debate airlines and shipping earlier. Next topic, education and constraints. After 2 is precision. Their interpretation is no intent to exclude nor define. Just use to sit in a sentence. Reasonability. Competing interpretations causes a race to the bottom. The FTC counterplay. FTC has no jurisdiction over the act. McCullough in 21. The DOJ has the sole authority to investigate and prosecute antitrust cartels to the extent the FTC identifies conduct. It may refer the investigation to the DOJ. Counterclaims must compete textually and functionally. That the interest and benefits are being tested the plan, and instead of a case engagement textual or functional, all unrealistic counterplans that can be contrived and semantic distinctions that discourage clash and disadvantage. The affirmative permutations. 1 is do the counterplan. The FTC acts as a core antitrust law. 2 is do both solves that benefit because the FTC maintains rulemaking authority. The counterplan is struck down on non-delegation grounds. Walker 21 says rulemaking could expose the FTC receive legal justice under the non-delegation doctrine, which limits the extent to which Congress may delegate lawmaking power to agencies, although non-delegation is seldom in about 5 injustices expressed interest in preventing the doctrine. Those who counsel the majority of the FTC Act delegates authority to regulate unfair behavior may be susceptible to challenge on the grounds that Congress must have an FTC's delegated power. Now the advantage counterplan.
I didn't read a Chevron internal link.
Yeah, they didn't read a Chevron internal link for FTC. Advantage counterplan. Conditionalities of any issue discourages the introduction of best offense and optimal decision making leads to shallow policy analysis and undermines research. Dispositionality solves their offense. No kicking flanks multiplies the number of condo and links to our offense permutation. Do both. The counterplan lead to the counterplan would link to the DOJ disadvantage because they would have to be involved in litigation post giving foreign aid. Permutation to the counterplan. It's an example of how the plan could be done. Throwing money at the problem does nothing. As a glue and 14 diagnosing problems. One thing fixing it is another. The DOJ can remove properties that development. The results not so good. More than a quarter of countries are more now than in 1960. It however substantive will in poverty. Library received massive amounts of aid for a decade, but everyone, the students failed all. The idea is still failing aid flows have done little to change the development trajectories of four countries. The R&D plank fails. Marino et al. 16 and overall evaluation of public subsidies to R&D and by continuous treatment also serve as likelihood of creating anti-flex methods are showing the way. Norwich is on pre-treatment variables results so the show substitution may occur for medium high levels of subsidies to recipients of larger justice. Here to perform worse than numbers to be efforts to find a specific sense of negative effects of considerable reduction and growth of private R&D. Those receiving subsidies exhibit lower private contribution. Public research should not be redirected from projects toward companies that would perform equally well without this funding. The court clock just said. Stern's floodgate argument is wrong and racist. Gorman 19. The floodgate argument is a slippery slope on how a judicial ruling would set up President Stern 2003 despite its prevalence. There are few studies of the floodgate argument even within the legal studies since the exact phrase is rarely used. Floodgate figures represent sexist, racist, and nationalist statements. Courts are clogged now. Lands with all 21 judges are being confronted by an array of pitfalls and very real dilemma. Backlogs of cases that pile up, exacerbating crowded docket backlogs are a big topic. Judges are spending all their time dealing with cases. Litigation moved exceptionally slowly, in which jury trials are logistically difficult and entirely devoted for the monster to resolving the backlog. Dumpers, antitrust, Rivero, and 21 anti-monopoly enforcement is invoked for rapid shift. Now federal prosecutors have joined forces with the state attorney started to be sitting suits under Facebook and Google. Any investigation could take years of legions of lawyers to be the minutiae market balance. We've taken a step of the world list of every major antitrust case against Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple pending today. Capital Riot also comes first time to 2,100 people. The case for starting the Capitol federal prosecutors have did that call over for 30 cases assigned to the attorneys favor spending purpose to strain the justice system and required message through the rest of cases. Hundreds land on the docket in the next few weeks and months. The plan preserves judicial economy because it eventually results in countries taking the cases in their own country, and the courts that evaluate things like overfishing are different from the ones that evaluate antitrust. DOJ. They've conceded a thumper from the 1AC that the DOJ is expanding enforcement of Section 2 cases now, which they haven't done in decades. The plan congressionally authorizes the DOJ to annually categorize the classes of immigrant type cases that can be heard by U.S. courts. That effort isn't resource intensive and relies on civil, not criminal enforcement. That's 1AC Schmidt and 2AC Simmons. And 18, according to the Sherman Act, violations may be prosecuted civil, criminal. The DOJ retains the responsibility for criminal enforcement and civil proceedings, but private plaintiffs seek relief and damages. Congressional authorization would increase DOJ funds. Agencies are always given more money when assigned new tasks. Their impact is ridiculous. The 1AC guard against the DOJ fails. 1AC Mansky and 324 DOJ successes don't mean ransomware is going away. Cyber attacks high and increasing. 1AC Wellburn. Then 21 cyber criminals have been escalating for cybercrime. Reorganized and rebound. No impact. Libby and 20. Cyber in cyberspace can escalate to very high levels without creating unlimited damage. The difficulty of finding obvious fabrics in cyber is not necessarily fatal to knowledge. Cyber work can be continued, but the nature of cyberspace is self-decay. Framework developed is a referendum on the hypothetical consequences of the plan. Any links must be to the implementation of the plan, and there must be an alter causally solves the harms of the inclusion of the plan, precluding the solvency. It's key to fairness. Plan focuses the most predictable and non-arbitrary. Any other interpretation ex post shifts the goalpost, which moves the 1AC permutation. Doable capitalism is good. Ace of point is developed market competition is critical. Predictor of growth cartels to finish for pricing. Reduction in R&D, which creates breeding grounds for violent conflict. That's core right. Independently, competition alleviates poverty, inequality, and improves quality of life. That's like many evidence. All can't solve it. Decline hammers. Global development causes poverty to skyrocket. Piper and 21 developing nations account for 63% of emissions. It means degrowth would do nothing about emissions. The economies are interconnected with COVID-19. The poor countries were devastated by the aftershocks of virus, and slowdowns in consumption. Sudden drop in consumption would affect the developing world. Hunger, rose, and mortality. Quality growth case for not Christian. The poor world is predicated on speculative. Take how countries can grow when in those countries are sure to is widely optimistic, disconnected from policy results. There's an extremely strong association between growth and welfare. GDP is a better predictor of welfare outcomes and well-being. The things degrowth is care about are strongly correlated with wealth. Wealthier societies get better health outcomes. Across the board, we have to be at least skeptical about decoupling wealth from living status. People want food, they need to go to the doctor, they need childcare. B supports war, CAP solves it, January 16, decline in interstate violence, stronger multilateral institutions and greater cross-border trade, as well as border exchange and interdependence acts as a break on violence, global financiers, minimizing global course military, actors might be and global capital globalization, increased power approaches, not to military aggression, interdependence, conduct a complex that would break out during a great prioritization. The Sino-American relationship is so deep that it reduces GPW growth is sustainable. Bailey in 19, the state of humanity in the natural world is long course dramatically, and by the end of the century, peak population is rapid economic growth. World population will more likely peak around 8.9 billion. Increased urbanization, rising incomes and families just have fewer children, forced expansion, and global tree can be cover increased by 2.224 million square kilometers. Summer resource abundance index state over 50 foundational commodities covering energy, food, materials, and metals. The prices for 43 commodities declined. The real price of 50 commodities fell by 36.3%. Air pollution trends gross domestic participate increased 165%. Total emissions of 6 principal air pollutants struck by 67%. I'm marking that at 67%. No financialization war. Borrowing somebody doubling ushered in comprehensive reform attacking regulatory arbitrage, restricting risky activities. Major financial firms are subject to higher prudential standard by forcing firms to internalize costs. They will be incentivized to shrink and reduce their complexity. Should such a firm fail, there will be the bigger buffer to absorb losses. The international community put forward new rules on capital, so there are bigger buffers, and the system derivatives reforms are succeeding. Socialism is a social and environmental catastrophe. McAfee, the 19th socialism is a catastrophe. The historical record was quite clear. Fluctuating prices for our signals of best scarcity and abundance. These cause people to take action through free floating prices. Do an important double duty. They provide information and instead of prices fixed you. Never have doubted that socialist said, I like to stand on the whole idea you can bring about the same order. There's just nothing left. The people of Venezuela are suffering as they provide this lesson. They nationalized companies spot food then sold out as the first food. But if the actual sale catastrophe, then human suffering socialism can be slow acting poison. Adults lost 20 pounds. Malnutrition was widespread. The country's GDP dropped 35%. The largest collapse seen in history. Annual inflation was 10 million %. Socialism focuses an inverse neutron bomb that inflicted massive damage on infrastructure, healthcare, production of goods. So the first McAfee card is market production of goods.
Where is that?
It's at least halfway down. It's really like 3/4 of the way down. It's the paragraph that starts with socialism function that is an inverse neutron bomb, and it's marked at production of goods. Yep.
Okay, good to go.
Yes.
Reasons to reject precise conduct.
No.
I didn't catch any.
Yeah, just condo.
Okay.
Sorry.
On the Middle East impact, you said that it does not, that our defense does not assume the U.S. model of competition as successfully deterring war. How does the U.S. model of competition deter war?
You've conceded like a ton of empirical studies that indicate that competition and growth are detracting to conflict.
Can you explain like the causal mechanism?
Yeah, so besides the robust statistical correlation being one of the most strong in economic literature, the mechanism is that competition creates economic efficiencies. It provides social and economic goods to the people, which makes them less likely to engage in like nationalist sentiments or aggression towards other countries. Go ahead.
I just want to make sure that I understand internal correctly. The internal link is that competition is necessary for egalitarian resource distribution, correct?
That is one internal link.
What are the other ones?
That it promotes GDP and growth and alliances and interdependence.
How is GDP relevant?
Yeah, we think that GDP is generally associated with social and economic prosperity, the ability of people to have
again, it just seems like
the goods and services that they need.
It really does seem like all of your internal links to an impact about war are reliant on an egalitarian resource distribution then, and that the statistical correlation you've isolated relies on an equal distribution of resources, correct?
Yeah, and we read evidence that socialism
definitely
So
doesn't
then
have to
the
be
debate
equitable
then, just to
for
clarify, is about which one is better at fostering that egalitarian distribution. The next question I have concerns T. I want to clarify what the plan does. Does the plan, like, what do you think that there is an exemption that says currently you're not allowed to sue at all?
Yeah, the Emperor decision.
So the Emperor decision, your argument is, this says that it limits the scope, not that it prevents all lawsuits though, correct?
Yeah, it was an exemption that was provided that says that when countries or encourage countries to, or I guess exempted cases where they had exempted the US from evaluating it where they had inadequate form.
The Popovsky evidence just seems to use the term scope contextually. Where do you think it has intent to define the term scope?
Yeah, it says like it would require giving the Sherman Act some extraterritorial scope. I think there's other Popovsky cards that are like, it would expand like the number of cases that it could adjudicate.
I know, I'm just asking, do you think that it does have an intent to define?
Yeah.
First, you do, and what is the basis for that argument?
That it uses it with intent to define, like this kind of stuff.
Okay, I was just curious. The second question is that, does your counterinterpretation mean that if any court case which allows more claims under antitrust statute, like any court case that does that's topical?
I don't understand your question at all, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. We'll start.
10 minutes. Start.
The order is the okay. Hey, did everyone get it? Okay. You ready? Okay, we're good.
Yeah, sorry.
All right, I will begin. The U.S. economic order is premised on constant imperial expansion and permanent war in Asia. The need to spread antitrust law abroad stems from the colonial desire to halt the rise of China and other peripheral powers. The app's economic motives are guides for racist control and extraction of Western corporations. The K outweighs the imperial dynamics perpetuated in the app can only result in pure war or a Chinese economic collapse. Both the nuclear foster 21. Periodic wars over imperial hegemony, the only answer that the capitalist system is capable of providing. The world we're on trying to drug together the regions, the states, and the alliance to the binding Beijing to the international order while keeping the Chinese economy going. China is too big to be conquered and too big to fail. But what is required is a counter revolution be imposing the unequal treatment of the object is to constrain China. Such a strategy is to be backed up by the military forces. These conditions put the world's population in danger. Nuclear arms race in danger of thermonuclear war. The framework debate we meet, we will always disagree with the competition and antitrust of the affirmative, but interpretation of the threshold for links is demonstrating methodological incompatibility. The debate is a comparison between their neoliberal liberalization approach and our anti-capitalist alternative resistance. Dissad, our interpretation orients debate around scholarship and activism relative to anti-capitalist resistance. Their model dooms anti-capitalism to irrelevance by overindulging tweaks to the system designed to empower capitalism. Only the alternative scholarly model can cohere an effective alternative. Just 19 integrating neoliberalism into state projects to record control whether the state apparatus finance benefits from the political capitalism. These forces have strong interest in weakening liberal democracy in favor of an authoritarian state as post-democracy that can reinforce the financialization, manage crisis, and channel political resistance. Class struggle proper can develop if commodification is pushed beyond limits. Particularly when the capitalist reproduction, capitalist hegemony provoke counter struggle in society's fight back into is to transcend this first struggle. Attention must be turned to the ways in which society society acquires cohesion to resist neoliberal market forces that require some movement to actions oriented to the general interests of society framed within an alternative hegemonic project rather than securing particular economic corporate advantages within the capital relation. Neoliberalism involved the reorganization of the state power on authoritarian states alliance to defend finance accumulation in the broader project framework comes before the alternative debate methods for advocacy construction spill up, but individual acts do not, even if the plans desirable on a broader level. Their political economic invasion embraces structures that cannot incorporate socialist reforms necessary to stop the cycles of instability and ecological collapse. It is predictable if you aren't prepared to answer the CAFE with a trade liberalization good act, then you deserve to lose. Plan focuses arbitrary and vex argumentation. A good case debate depends on epistemological or theoretical indices. It would be illogical to respond to warming is not real with just a bunch of never good new warming bad cards. You'd have to write indices to that argument. Clash and fairness in a vacuum are not valuable. It's an epistemologically sound debate is better than a slightly more fair one. There's also no bright line to determine if we have sufficient fairness. The permutation, it's non-starter. We read 5 minutes of impact turns to the app. The links are disads to the plan. The links to the one and see discourse and resource. The research demonstrate the methodological incompatibility, which should be enough to reject it and just compare the alternative to the app. I'm going to do the extraterritorial link here. The extraterritorial application to the U.S. competition rules cements free trade imperialism. The U.S. uses antitrust and concerns about anti-competitive practices abroad to enforce the broader WTO liberalization rules for development across the global periphery, regardless of the stated purposes. The primary underlying principle that guides the U.S. antitrust enforcement is the need to contain and exploit China, while asserting hegemonic control in the pursuit of U.S. extraction and competition laws inherited from the 19th century colonial techniques of the coercion. The people who enforce and benefit from the act will only be satisfied by the complete subjugation of China's economy to the interests of its capitalists. That means completely wrecking their model of state-led development. There's a competition regime link. They have dropped the thesis of the Harvey evidence that the act swings the global economy towards a competitive regime that replaces the underproduction crisis affecting supply chains with an overaccumulation regime that causes quick deindustrialization and economy-wide asset bubbles. Quick capitalization of new firms creates a major mismatch between the production and aggregate demand, which causes financial crisis. That's proven by the 2008. In the 1930s, financial crisis turns every advantage they export unsustainable model to every country they are seeking to help. It also makes gains in supply chain stability, transient and unsustainable. Finish the Harvey evidence that's centralized the mega corporations, solution lines, capitalists, and brand new. So the monopoly can price can be charged monopoly privileges by other means of the decentralization, preserve their centralized power of the power, the massive nature of centralized power, the kind of leader of individual liberty, policymakers of the replicate conditions that spark the innovation beyond the digital revolution. The 1990s, despite the way it crashed and burned, no feasible alternative will be able to abolish contradictions. The only question is how to work within them, work with them, the pursuing the tremia of decentralization, open hidden constraints, monopoly control, capitalists to balance and rebalance through crisis in order to interfere with centralization, hamstring anti-capitalist opposition. The contradictory relation cannot be effectively mobilized for anti-capitalist struggle. Competitive market economies lock in development failures tied to intent. If administration of peoples is spread of the armed conflict and environmental devastation are to be avoided, we must think outside the box. The contemporary world order, this requires reconsideration-based premises, dominant powers ensured legacy of colonialism would remain underdressed with the unloyal, so that colonial relations would be reproduced in new forms. The resulting states have been plagued by the separatist movement, civil wars, and secession. This is undermined any hope of actual peace or security. There were 97 wars between states compared to the one state versus state and 6 nation versus nation wars. 80% of all deaths genocide resulted from state-directed genocide. Many have been caught in downward part of the dysfunctional distribution systems of food basic necessities, predatory crime, private security forces, ethnic violence, and refugees. There's an agricultural liberalization link. Antitrust measures are primary leverage against subsidies and price control protections for farmers. That's saying those protections are independently responsible for the largest reduction in poverty in human history, eliminate supports for direct development. Kaplan 18. China's leaders do not unleash the agri markets as Western agencies recommend concentrated on ensuring the peace of peasants, farmers have the record resources and incentives. The state remain in control of the prices of the investments of the research and training. Paid huge dividends gains of the immediate and drastic hundreds of millions of escaped poverty, higher incomes and productivity prompted demand for new products that China's most successful firms got there. Certain agri-rural enterprises produce the millions of jobs. The act's agricultural policy wrecks rural sustainability in China. That's kills in 18. With the increase in political ecological contradiction from the dismantling egalitarian entitlement, the government has embarked upon its investment to the potential arrest and poor policies and the defense of diffuse rural tensions in the face of external crisis. No unrest occurred because the workers are still unable to return home. The basis of egalitarian access to land continues to erode through the land speculation, creeping and privatization. China is so fortunate to having the strong rural conservation movement that seeks to define an egalitarian alternative path to developmentalism and capitalism, address the contradictions for the advances of the epochal convulsions that will eventually engulf the model. Social egalitarianism is conjoined to the ecological sustainability in the organic farming, the agroecology argument, the argument about development, all the sort of developmental arguments answered that the first kind of component of it, the alternative does not doom develop itself to destruction, embraces socialist models of development to check the imperial expansion of the U.S. movements across the periphery, and with China push for more equitable social order and redistribution of resources away from military and finance, localizing production and resisting market competition are key to social sustainability, which undergirds every app impact. The alt flips, try or die, solves all their warrants. Nielsen 21, bulk accumulation can progressively counteract crisis dimension, deal with capitalism projects to make the never slow machines of material accumulation for food, shelter, clothing, and some manufacturing manufacturing, which are stable, efficient, ecological, sustainable, democratic, coordinated, inclusive, and self-sufficient. That when competent, stable, penetrated accumulation systems that socialized cosmopolitan knowledge can be developed to facilitate universally sustainable accumulation. No single model can fit every country. It can fit every country, minimizing distance between production and consumption, reduces the movements to spread the virus, the ecological cost of the cost of the factory in agriculture that can refer to small scale organic ag that the seeds of the soil health and ecological balance. Small technologies optimize local scale auto-centric local accumulation, refers to competition that courts other countries and to reduce wage demand, facilitates welfare institutions and health, education, employment, and income. Local regimes would reverse unsustainable rate of ecological consumption, dispossession of peasantry, feed for the surplus population, peasant movement into the peasants, promote economies in ecologies and scopes such as Zapatistas and via Campencia states would promote green tech and the Green Deal. The argument about capitalism solves war, that's wrong. Kenny's going to read that card. The argument about growth is sustainable, that is wrong. Contradictions in capitalism are irresolvable, may collapse inevitable. Two reasons. One is financialization. A speculative economy built up to sustain production will be undermined by stagnating wages, lack of land access, resource depletion, and climate disruption flows will decrease consumption in importing countries, which will result via debt, enforced restructuring in manufacturing and agriculture will cause the structural global vulnerabilities and shocks. Second is agriculture. Corporate consolidation and restructuring creates a structural unemployment and mass land diversion to increase output with skyrocket soil erosion, biodiversity loss, and dex profit in the short run. None of their tech evidence answers this because it's about land displacement. Tech only exacerbates centralized control over ag abroad, which displaces billions of peasant farmers. We are impact turning any sort of tech development in the Bailey evidence combination of quick tech changes with the aft liberalization cause extinction through social and ecological collapse till 18. Efficiencies due to high capitalization. The capitalized agriculture have been premised on the systematic discounting of ecological and energetic costs of the form of climate change and soil exhaustion, water pollution, depletion, biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, social unsustainability, and cultural degradation. The shocking financial establishment of 50 million farms through expropriation. What will become of the billions of non-competitive peasant farmers, producers? No development has the capacity to absorb this labor reserve. Commodity oversupply under consumption render the farmer of their utopian far greater ecological fragility and resistance to sources in the global south that can offer planet slums or render uninhabitable ecologically. The modernization of agriculture with production would entail destruction of entire societies and ecosystems incapable of ensuring survival of humanity. The Bailey piece of evidence from reason.com, the inherently suspect, our evidence analyzes the actual causes and has qualified person to talk about this. The financialization argument that says regulations like Dodd-Frank, check it, that's not our argument. Our argument is about the sort of broad sort of way in which the global capitalism's restructured economies of the global south and how they operate, not how global banks within the US are able to like increase securitization. It's not our argument. The socialism's ecological disasters, the Nielsen piece of evidence above answers this. Their McAfee evidence ignores the way in which the US has been blatantly destructive towards socialist countries with the burning of Russian fields by Germany, etc. All this prove that there's other causes than just socialists destroy the environment. It's also not our socialism, we're not 20th century. 758. I'm gonna have you 756.
Coleman, can you hear me from Trinity's mic? Okay, sweet. Good for cross-text?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk about like the real connection of some of these link arguments to the affirmative. The first is like the extraterritorial antitrust link. The status quo has created a regime where countries are encouraged to rely on more developed antitrust regimes, but denied standing in the US. Why should that kind of colonial arrangement remain?
We think the alternative to that should not be to establish a different colonial regime where we force like liberalization of their economies. That has empirically not worked, and you're basically returning to like the 70s onward where we try to liberalize everything.
I guess I understand what you're trying to do. The framework argument is just about the threshold for the links. Under your model of debate, does the negative have any responsibility for like the alternative?
We think that the alternative has to be methodologically incompatible with the F.
Okay. What does that mean? Like, does it have to be mutually exclusive in like a functional sense?
In a theoretical, like academic sense, that is good.
An academic
You have said liberalization is good. We have said liberalization is bad. We have a different, distinct economic model. Those are mutually exclusive.
Do you have one line from one card that actually establishes the bright line of mutual exclusivity?
You read like 8-9 minutes of like trade liberalization, economic development good. That is a capitalist model. That is exactly what Nielsen is critiquing. Like,
okay, in what way does the app try to contain China?
Our evidence says that antitrust against cartel enforcement internationally is a primary target of capital, primary targets China.
We have argued that cartels are emerging in like Middle East and Latin America. Why is that the same thing as China?
Okay, you would also allow for enforcement against cartels in China. Like
most of China's
irrelevant. Is
like
using cartels. Yes.
Most of China's businesses are like state-owned enterprises or shielded from the plan. Like, I don't understand this link argument at all.
They also engage in cartel enforcement. Like
China engages in cartel enforcement?
No cartels. Sorry. enforcement.
Okay,
would
China
be-
engages in cartels. Your argument is that this is like, there's so many levels to this. Okay, what makes you think that China does not have a developed antitrust regime?
They could. I don't really know. It's just
Okay,
not. It's
so-
not
so
based
it
on
could be
the.
the
It's not
case
the
that-
same as the U.S. Like this.
So it could be the case that the plan does not apply to China at all.
Well, the plan could apply to China, and the plan will be applied to China.
Gotcha.
That is our first piece of evidence.
Wait, which evidence?
The very long one in the 1 and C, the first one that talks about the long
I'll
history
look
of
that
applying
up.
competition
Last
policy to
question,
China.
agricultural liberalization. What does agriculture policy look like in the world of the art?
Nielsen describes that you can't exactly say it for everybody, but the local small scale down agriculture where you're producing for your local environment instead of trying to feed the globe be out of the global south.
That sounds woefully inadequate to feed the globe. Why isn't it?
It's actually not. And your assumption that we have to just like grow a bunch of corn to feed everybody, and when we have like food surpluses, is like just wrong.
It's sent. While people are pulling it up, I'll give it orders. That's all right. DOJ, Court Claw, FTC, Advantage Counterplan, T, Advantage 2, Advantage 1, to K.
That's my dude, one more time.
Yes, yeah. DOJ,
Mhm.
Court Claw, FTC, Advantage Counterplan, T, Advantage 2, Advantage 1.
Oh, well, that's on the table.
I'm very sorry. I actually never initially labeled my flows. Where's section 5? That's
Oh,
FTC, right?
After court plug.
Yeah. For what it's worth, it probably will not matter much.
Cause I was gonna say, we're not going for
That's a good prediction.
it.
Going for all.
And advantage counter plan.
T, advantage 2, advantage 1.
Okay. Okay. Everyone good to go. All right, I'm gonna start unless anyone has any objection. Concede the fails following cyber and no impact. Court Claw concede thumpers. FTC concede the perm. Advantage counterplan, same thing. Condo counter interpret judge consider any opportunity cost. The app true test. Narrative art shows the app competition by learning out. Innovative research. Don't prop bad accident. Lose marketplace of ideas. Advocacy skills. Force students to understand argument interaction. That encourages students to choice and argument streamlining. Ideological flexibility. Condos know when to read decay and counterplan same debate. That versus speedy divides. Head ground and clash. Keep check twisty sandbag. If key details. The alternatives worse. 1. Illusionary counterplans. Snakes are risk averse. So they'll only read unanswerable counterplans to ensure success. 2. T and DAs. They require more answers because you can't learn single IP warrants. They're opposite counterplans. Diminishing marginal returns checks. Going to test the agent processing action of the plan. They can always have multiple counterplans. T. Affirmative teams must curtail an exemption or immunity. The scope of antitrust is defined in terms of these exemptions. Expand requires of the affirmative, make that scope broader, not just intensify enforcement of existing prohibitions. Cartel behavior is already prohibited by U.S. law. The act really provides another possible application of that law. The WEME, it just makes it harder, not impossible to sue. That was all cross-sex error. It decreases this assessment just as they expand the scope slightly, but not that they actually remove an exemption or immunity. It does not list a specific exemption or immunity. Adjust by the plan. It's not good enough. Sagers 21. Antitrust reads the full extent of trader commerce content striking broadly as equivalent to our competence is difficult to conduce scope. Antitrust has exemptions, several peculiar judgments made. Also, the reach of statutory scope where no exemption available cuts very broadly based questions boundaries of trader commerce. The counter interpretation, our interpretation is key to principle limits. If the act can simply find an activity that isn't adequately covered by antitrust law, then anything becomes topical. Federal courts have decided 4,278 rule of reason cases. Defendants won 95% of those under their interpretation. Reversing any of them will be topical. Beheson 17 stats center the plaintiff loses more than 95% of antitrust cases. The expand is clarify argument links all of our limits offense because it means any clarification of antitrust law is topical, explodes topic, expanded requires bringing new areas into the domain of antitrust law. McIntyre Mills 14, expanding scope means bringing in a wider range of issues into the domain. Their precision argument, their evidence of intent to define, that was all cross-section for our evidence from the ABA Antitrust Sections Committee on Exemptions and Immunities, which literally wrote the authoritative text called Handbook on the Scope of Antitrust Law. It's a T evidence gold standard with explicit intent to define. Crucial 19. Committee include government interest officials, counsel, and academics, and contributors to expertise in skill and antitrust a high priority. They're premier in the field. Bigger 19, the ABA cites antitrust law as peer gathering in the field. The over-limiting argument, it's structurally impossible. The field of antitrust law is enormous. Waller 20, antitrust law, we get the important articles, increased number of books, there are a plethora of studies. New works of flourishing, long form and mass market journals take up its foreign antitrust at the technical end. Antitrust is flourishing and into the with a wide variety of protected from litigated enforcement cases. Teacher multiple briefs of both sides, the third approach to make significant changes. Here's a comprehensive list, which we are inserting, which just proves all of their over-limiting offense. neg limits outweigh any of the Apple rule limit stuff because they make it literally impossible because the amount of stuff, but the Apple always have something to say because of infinite pre-round preparation. Advantage 2. No food or resource wars. Large and regression found food shortages weren't motivating war. It appears from sub-Saharan Africa proves countries that lack food and conflict that fear governments includes confounding variables like poverty, oil, and political instability, which cause food shortages and war, and are also all things that decay accesses that their authority does not. Advantage 1. The ag scenario is backwards. U.S. model is what drives unstable agriculture. Chinese model is better and solves global rural sustainability. McMichael. 21. WTO Liberalization Agriculture Corporation valuing war prices avoiding small farmers. Liberalization means we're hospital food regime transition with agribusiness food companies during environmental activism, technological companies that practice climate support, agriculture green, agricultural lives, so field underwriting, climate change, environmental contamination, genetic and digital technology spacing, agricultural farmers, prefer poisoning, ecology, malnutrition, public health crisis, counter movement 2, restore soil, adopting liberalized rules, China engage alternative patterns in rising defiance of WTO, food moves within, deregulated financial subsistence, undermines planetary integrity, small producers for the ecological relations, reducing agri inputs, storing knowledge, biodiversity, soil, dead, soil threatened, viability of sort of farming was contained with financialized agribusiness, pest coalition, critique WTO, sovereign, power focusing ecological principles, overriding public sovereignty, underscores challenge globalization, reactive purchasing, trade wars, protection, populist corporate, capture through conversion of food crops, spirit capitalism that passed the human stress from the regime with the huge agrarian sector, food self-sufficient, agricultural farming, and China's support for the transitioning regime where the China model of domestic support, as well as industrialization and assist pest and agriculture, and elsewhere remains to be seen. Go back to T. I realize about the answer reasonability links all our limits off as we can. Policy return for the scope of all reasonable interpretations. It's arbitrary and causes judge intervention. Now back to advantage 1. The U.S. causes Middle East instability. Profit-led growth triggers dispossession, sparks economic crisis, and causes waste migration that destabilize the region. That's OBEG and ODOOM evidence. This broadly turns to a war scenario as well. Cross can see that the only relevant internally to war is the egalitarian resource distribution because that's what motivates people to take up arms against the state. They conceded the re-highlight of their evidence, which explicitly says that the thing which causes Middle East war is income inequalities, which should be accessed that internally through the K. We access the Middle East scenario much better. U.S. model causes wars in Middle East, country 17. In our countries, class relations collapse, laying the ground for nationalist collapse, understated openness, use imperialism, racism, rants by destroying nations, war turbulence, drive resources towards market which capital needs the cohesion of the Arab comprador class, the rise of trans global leadership is unstoppable, abuse, dominates, structure fosters, exploitation, expropriation to wars, financialization becomes visible as a offshoot of imperialist wars. China key. No, never mind. Latin America. China will offer peace and multilateralism seen by coexistence between the U.S. and Chinese blocs. Shifting U.S. policy to hard balancing force, military competition, alters China's internal catechism and a peaceful rise. They have no answer to this in the 1 and C's. They basically conceded China hedge good. It goes nuclear in the SES of Taiwan, 2018. Beijing could decide, could they even push back and efforts to justify China's determination in the SES. Washington could augment trusting beliefs regarding Taiwan. It could block a purpose place to ensure Taiwan remains separate. China exports inclusive global governance, less multilateral norms, which internally turns all their scenarios down. Does not have an internal impact, anything besides famine, which this argument turns cap 118. Chinese leaders didn't unleash ag markets as Western agencies could recommend, concentrated to ensuring past partners had resources and incentives to state remained in control pricing, investments, research, training, paid huge dividends, gains, were immediate and dramatic contributions to poverty, higher income, productivity, promise to answer new products, trust successful firms that certain ag rural enterprise produce millions of jobs. The K. CAB does not solve war. Say 21. Even though they don't relate to deaths, recent deemed capitals deadly of the communist massive orders of magnitude, capitals strategically prone to warfare. War is a way to gain upper hand competition for accumulation with World War I, 20 human deaths directly caused by the regimes globally in the Russian Civil War, state genocide, Italian government murder in Ethiopia, and Syrian genocide, shock of war, especially World War II, Italian caused capitalists and their best allies, property from war. The theories are based on defending private property, busting units of urban leftists about 120 million if one takes loose approach networks favored by anti-communists within 3 decades after war. Then 75 years of communism, the French colonial regime was responsible for deaths in Southeast Asia, Madagascar, and Nigeria, British colonial roll costs, 1.5 deaths in India, Pakistan, the war of liberals in Colombia, persecution of war on Greek leftists. Mark at Greek leftists. Giannis Varoufakis, you know. All right.
That was cited in the AT Solves War.
650.
Also, my verbatim a minute ago kind of screwed up the formatting of some of the T cards, but they're all like readable and stuff. Okay. Are we good for an order? Advantage 1. Advantage 2. Topicality. The court plug DA. You kept that flow. The critique.
Sorry, did you say advantage 2, advantage 1, or 1, 2?
1, 2. Is everybody good?
Advantage 1, I'm taking the ag impact, which solves to turn the US might cause instability, but they've dropped our internal link as growth, which link turns it because growth, because markets are threat deflating, inequality is one line, and they've kind of dropped a straight turn that'll be on the K. Economic development solves extinction. Robust growth stops nuclear terror. Warning of war, that's core right, hard balancing. What's the link? The plan is an increased presence in Asia, just stops promotion of their political model as per the democracy stuff. You've read a hedge bad card, and the F did not read a hedge impact. Authoritarianism guarantees extinction, global state collapse, WMD proliferarism. That's a diamond evidence. Advantage 2, we're conceding to food wars, which solves that. Resource wars drop, they're coming, cause extinction, and that the F solves them. They cause scarcity driven lash out and global war. That's the clear evidence. They've conceded that the root cause of resource shortages is cartels and supply bottlenecks, which none of their evidence addresses topicality. Now we meet. I am only going for we meet because they've inserted a case list that includes the FTAIA, created an exemption that Sherman shouldn't be applied abroad. The plan reverses that. That's GVC Pavlovsky. Look both ways before you insert a case list. One in our Jaegers 15, the extraterritorial reason of U.S. antitrust law codification of extraterritorial scope, and FTAIA. They say we don't mean legislative exemptions. That's kind of irrelevant because that isn't your inter. But judicial interpretations expand the scope. Case and judicial interpretations define the scope of the antitrust laws. Court decisions can expand the scope. Stone 10 Copperwell. Limitation of a single entity defense is the first decision. Is in time that expands the scope of the Sherman Act. Courts formulate standards that expand the scope of antitrust prohibitions. Back at 68, the courts formulated a standard which extended the scope of antitrust prohibitions. Now, the case list does not meet their interpretation because it is all mediated through court interpretations because those determine how antitrust law is enforced. Statutory immunity is not their inter. Court clog. They've dropped the Stern evidence, the Stern argument that they introduced in the 1&T is racist. It's a GA to their framework. The 1&T cited a fear-mongering xenophobe who staked his academic career on churning out anti-immigrant propaganda. Is a far larger GA to their model. So obviously, which is a GA to them, and our interpretation does not exclude weighing reps. So they do not get to concede our interp to go out of it. There's no judge instruction on what to do when both teams have done bad reps. So default to a very clear instance of racism. Okay. Overview, no China war. Internal markets are threat deflating because collapsing China's economy would instantly implode America's growth. Rest will be below. Framework, we can weigh offense ability equal relative to the ability of advocacy to solve it, which means we get the plan and they get the K, but they're responsible for unique links and also let's say offense is close to dropped 1. Fairness, they can zero in any small error. And when you see scholarship, which makes you link, you lose and takes away our best defenses of our reps out ways. It creates basic assumption and sole incentive for research. 2, advocacy, defending real world praxis, forces contextualization, and in-depth research, which takes contextual research, which straight turns resistance. A focus on regulatory tweaks is good because it encourages nuance, and if the cap K is true, you can use it to negate the plan above stuff. Impact turns they're all. It's not plan focus good, it's plan exclusion bad. The K is predictable, but mooting the plan is not. You should be able to apply epistemology to the one you see. Our interp is the bright line, which solves fairness, and it doesn't matter that it's a sliding scale because you should prioritize it. Permutation do both. Frame combination through actor separation. The agent of the alt is a bottom-up movement. The agent of the after Congress. If one policy shatters the revolution, it was doomed from the start. They also said that the alt was compatible with hegemony and occupying the Asia Pacific. If it's cool with hegemony, it should probably be cool with the plan. Containing China is non-unique because of the trade war and sanctions. The plan turns the Chinese economy because it encourages robust antitrust, which they've dropped boost growth. They've conceded China models the plan. They've dropped that means that we do not enforce antitrust against China, and they've conceded that turns the Chinese economy. D, industrialization is wrong because the root cause of supply bottlenecks is cartels, not capitalism. It assumes unsustainability, which will be below. Financial crisis lacks an impact. Heavy regulation forces banks to retain deep capital buffers and cushion them. And crisis and oversight reigns in risky lending. That's the juicy evidence. Development failures are impact turn them here. Low growth impoverishes governments, which wrecks infrastructure, welfare, and criminal justice. Large end studies show that breeds terror, war, and unchecked emissions, all existential. That's UNSC and core right. That's offense against the alt. COVID proves cratering Western consumption, spikes child mortality, hunger, and health. That's Piper. Cap solves war. Free trade, even if inequitable, promotes resource distribution, and powerful capitalist interest groups reign in adventurism by threatening capital flight. Dresner says China war, which turns it capitalism is key. GDP growth is the motivation for trade, and the US and China are on the brink of decoupling, so scaring off investors escalates. I'm going to read an ag liberalization card. Ag inputs are decreasing and outputs are increasing. McAfee 19 leader farms increased tonnage of output while decreasing inputs thanks to precision agriculture, motivation to decrease disease and drought tolerance, and also get more from each crop or herd will also take out a vulnerable populations. Agriculture has moved into farmers can be successfully monitors contained farms reduce planetary footprint. Nationalization of Chinese ag makes collapse inevitable. Donald 20, the question of food security gain the extraction of the national story has been a cycle in which the older becomes rest fails and is unable to keep public order. She is British option system makes it difficult actors of the vulnerable for diplomacy to an effort to divert attention from food security. China spoken in India's board of the SES who have had to restore troubles outside of the country while dealing with internal challenges. Pressure has come from supply chain problems and concerns. The government list reforms that China could face a food trouble. 2025 food is weaponized to pressure on food prices, something that helped spark China this year. One of the main promises made of the Communist Party has been flooded food. People revolt with their buildings. The ruling party should be concerned. Also, transition wars, turn environment. Smith 19 dismantling entire economic system is which much of our public major political appeal. Even socialism reinvented the realization of false use of military efforts and first led to prevent environmental degradation and climate is not a several decades to spare. You should prefer our evidence with respect to the war stuff because it starts large end studies, which theirs is purely speculative. The China stuff, the alt doesn't solve it. They said it was compatible with occupying the Asia Pacific. There's not a hold on. Okay, now drop down to the alt. It's vague. The logistics of a revolution are unexplained in the absent impact turn. It does not solve the case. Everyone you see eternal liberal democracy, growth, etc., are all impact turns, and we have impact turns to the alt. The transition alone irreversibly crushes development, which answers through defense. The alt doesn't solve resource bottlenecks because there's no explanation as to how it scales down consumption. How do we use dramatically less energy? It's just sort of asserted that reducing growth solves it. Financialization is answered about. The other one is resources, which I'll do here. Capitalism is sustainable. Stockpiles for dozens of commodities are increasing, and their evidence assumes resource bottlenecks, which is aft uniqueness. I hope you noticed they did not say cartels. That's the juicy Bailey evidence. They can't impact turn tech because they're all cards at the scale of renewables. Ag lacks an impact, and their card is only about farming, not renewables. Socialism bad is close to drop. Abolishing markets versus central management, which obliterates basic necessity production. Socialist societies can't gauge or respond to price signals, which impose infrastructure. Ev is an exclusive to 19th century Marxism, and you cannot say not our socialism without explaining why the indictment does not apply. Now, I'm going to read another. Okay, I finished the GCF. Was devastated capitalism. The problem is that it hasn't been allowed to spread. When there's more capitalism, there's more frustrated. The developing world's problems. The capitalism are reorganized protection of the force countries. Look at the book of the labor force outside its operation.
That's advantage 1. The court clog. The okay. Right. Is anyone not ready? That's good. Okay. The 1 AR drops the McMichael piece of evidence. That is enough for you to sign your ballot now. Our impact to the McMichael evidence was not food. It was environmental destruction and global starvation, which U.S.-led cartel, busting and liberalization guarantee because of technological intensification. They have not answered the Tilsey piece of evidence from the 2NC that says the modernization of agriculture doesn't just cause food decline, but causes the entire destruction of the planet and leaves the earth only inhabitable to a planet of slums incapable of ensuring our survival because it kicks out peasant producers and ensures that the U.S. fuckery throughout the global south. The tech quits corporate controlled and capital intensive. It locks in farming without farmers, which causes a planet of slums. The impact turns tech diffusion arguments. Current trends lock in reliance on petrochemical fertilizers and pesticide reductions and chemicals from efficiency gains are marginal. Rural smallholder tech cannot use those advances in capital inputs now. But expansion of trade rapidly expands monocropping techniques requiring pollution and soil exhaustion. We have only 60 years left of crops because at the current rate, the trade expansion makes it worse and causes extinction from global starvation. This piece of evidence turns every development and growth piece of evidence from that they're going to go for. Ace of points, rural supporters only. Price controls on grains, different agrarian economic collapse from debt. WTO is bent on eliminating them in developing countries, which causes quick shocks to the rural economies. The Ace of point is commodity speculation. Tech advances and corporate access to rural markets is highly financialized. Prices swing wildly, which makes the development revenue transient and rural planning impossible. And it makes rural planning impossible. Any other defense or impact arguments are going to be turned by the K. Court clock. Stern argument is ridiculous. The floodgates racist evidence about people fearing court clog from asylum cases was that argument with court clog from grants helping marine life. Even if they win this, there's not a reason to reject the team that impacts the case. Extinction impacts is nebulous, and we're not really going for framework in the way that they have said or described it, and we're not going for the argument where you can reject the argument, not the team, the critique. I'm going for the sort of extraterritorial, the competition enforcement link, because I don't think the 1AR has enough time here. The extraterritorial application of competition cements of free trade imperialism. Antitrust becomes the mode to enforce broader liberalization efforts. So it's proven by them reading evidence from the World Bank and the commanding evidence, which is than just an employee at the World Bank, regardless of the sort of development purpose or friendly or like poverty reduction sort of mentality of the 1AC. It's always a guide to extract from the global south. This is the sort of competition regime link. They have misunderstood the Harvey piece of evidence. They cement a global accumulation crisis that collapses emerging markets. The point of the Harvey evidence is that there may be problems with cartelization like the 1AR asserts, but the solution is not to pursue rapid competition and liberalization of open economies. It opens up barriers to U.S. corporations to mess around in the entire global south and leave them defenseless against what U.S. when it wants to create a bunch of small corporations that all do the same thing for the benefit of us. The gains never rise to the populations, only rise to the top of the U.S., which ensures any of their development, poverty reduction, any of that is never equalized and ensures they cannot gain anything. The Cite2 evidence compares this and it says it's a leading cause of war because it is the primary way in which the internal civil conflicts are more likely than interstate conflicts, which means even if they win some of the capitals war, some of their broader claims about thesis of war, we are winning the sort of root cause explanation of that. And that card was just not answered. The framework debate proper there. We're not really going for framework. They get the F, which is sufficient to meet all the 1AR arguments there. We are seriously just impact turning liberalization regime that the 1AC unlocks, and they have no sort of defense about why that is not fair. We are not going to do any K tricks. They obviously get the F, etc. The permutation, they don't get with permutation insofar as we have an impact turn to the F. Insofar as we have an impact turn to the F, and all of the link arguments prove that they are incapable of responding to the current crisis of capitalism, and only the alternative can address those problems. The arguments about antitrust, the arguments, the perm double bind essentially does not apply insofar as we are impact turning the F. The argument about occupying Asia is obviously ridiculous, not what we said in Crossix and a bunch of assertions, not a real argument. The argument about resource bottlenecks is an argument about resource bottlenecks that may be true and it may be caused by cartelization, but our Harvey evidence is just surprisingly amazing on the fact that it's just a competition does not resolve any of those supply side issues, and in fact creates a to focus on the supply side issues, and then we don't actually consider the demand side of things, which creates a realization crisis in the long run because nobody in the global south will be able to afford any of the new supplies that is argued for. The low growth unsustainability argument does not answer any any of our just Western development model bad. We are not saying development is bad. We are saying the Western-led development is bad. This is all solved by the alternative explanation when they just assert it's degrowth or socialism, et cetera. They're not answering the specific socialist development model that's not sort of universalized for every country. Our Nielsen evidence is super specific that it leads to different sorts of policy choices, localized, reducing agriculture to localized production, et cetera, which is sufficient to meet global agricultural demands, which is not really sufficient to meet global agricultural demands. I also think there's something like reduces the manufacturing sector beyond what we really need, and it can basically create a subsistence society. That's the Nielsen piece of evidence. That's the Nielsen piece of evidence, and so sure, it's sufficient solvency in the Capsules war argument. Every recent example goes negative. Kenny read like 40 seconds of this cited piece of evidence, which talks about every competent model in history and says that when you add them up, capitalism has killed way more than all of communist countries combined in like the last 30 years. Instead of this, a bunch of competence, including all of the recent invasions. Their argument about GDP being the main factor is obviously ridiculous. People still go to war for growth opportunities. Market war is a market opportunity, not the other way around. The agricultural inputs argument doesn't answer ours. The means by which we achieve a decrease, increasing agricultural inputs is by technological revolution, which the Tilty evidence impact turns, and so we are impact turning their way they get there, not if capitalism can get there. The argument about Chinese nationalization, not our argument. We aren't defending nationalization of agriculture, rather just the local accumulation structures. Transition wars assumes an immediate transition. We think that there are methods by which we can create transitions within the economy that don't necessarily happen overnight, which all of their evidence assumes. The argument about the alternative being a revolution, no, we are presenting an alternative model of development in relation to the affirmative super liberalized version of agricultural trade revolution, etc. The stockpiles,
It turns the resource wars offense.
yeah, it turns the resource and mineral wars offense, because insofar as we win that they collapse developing economies, it creates those same sorts of resource shortages. The ag scenario also strips out all resources from the planet and ensures stockpiling doesn't matter if it destroys the planet.
Okay. The order of the Shura will be advantage 2, advantage 1, the critique. All right, Coleman, are you good? Yeah, 2, 1, K. Everybody good?
Resource wars outweigh everything on probability and magnitude, independently of whether you think that market liberalization is good or bad in the abstract. Climate change is inevitable and will put increasing pressure on the world for metals and minerals that they will increasingly compete over, only disrupting cartels and distributing these minerals globally. For the diffusion of technology and development of renewables is able to solve inevitable conflicts that would escalate to great power wars, as well as proxy wars globally. They've conceded that cartels are hoarding metals and minerals now, and that will cause existential conflicts in convergence with climate change per the clear evidence, which means that it's try or die for the affirmative, because their impact might have a turns case argument, but the alternative does not have a means of resolving cartel practices and does not actually do anything to prohibit international cartels from hoarding those minerals, which means that only the liability within the U.S. can possibly solve. Go to advantage one. Yes, economic development impact turns the critique for obvious reason. Global economic development solves war, terrorism, and instability, which all escalate to the nuclear level. That's the UNSC evidence. You should are affirmative on evidence quality and the probability of our impact. The core rate evidence indicates that the relationship between economic development and peace is one of the most robust relationships in economic literature, which means that you should prefer it over all of their cards that are cut from Marxists, and just say that imperialism can cause war sometimes. It escalates, particularly in the Middle East, through proxy conflicts that draw in great powers like the United States, Russia, and China. Sluggish growth makes that inevitable. They have not extended sufficient defense. They say the McMichael evidence is, quote, not about food, it's about starvation. Those are the same thing, by the way. This is not conceded. It is answered by the 1AR McAfee evidence, which indicates that agriculture is so suitable because under agricultural liberalization, there's a decrease in necessary inputs and increase in outputs, that there are DNA modifications that are being made, and that crop tolerance is improving in the face of drought and climate change, which are all answers to their critique of environmental unsustainability. They argue that their argument about the alternative imposing price controls does not turn the advantage, does not turn the economic development advantage, because of the Bunkin-Winicha evidence in the 1AC that indicates that the only factor that can achieve economic development is competition, in order to make those economies more innovative and competitive, which is the only way to solve. It is an obvious root cause absent the plan. Now go to the critique. Framework, don't want to spend too much time on it. They've conceded we get the plan, so you should weigh it against the alternative, but their framing of the link arguments does not make any sense, because none of their cards rise to the level of mutual exclusivity. I'll extend permutation to both at the top, because if you buy it, then you can just vote on it. There's a double bind where if their alternative is able to coexist with hegemony, then it should be able to coexist with the affirmative. Most of their critique is not actually a reason why market liberalization is bad, but about why in China agriculture ought to be consolidated from the top. If you think that's a good thing and solves their impact, you can vote affirmative to endorse both extraterritorial liability within the United States and any kind of agricultural policy that you think China needs to undertake. The 200 does not really answer the argument that capitalism solves war. I explained the economic development warrants on the other page. They don't really have an answer to the Dresner evidence in the 2AC that indicates that interdependence is a check on US-China war, which caps the only external impact they have. They have also not answered the Smith evidence, which indicates that in a transition away from a competitive economy, there is likely to be transition wars. The Smith evidence specifically states that it turns environment as well, because under a crisis, countries would be more likely to use fossil fuels and not use renewable technologies and be environmentally wasteful. The way that they have gone for this critique is incoherent. The link argument is about extraterritorial application. The impact is about agriculture. The alt is, I guess, about reducing agriculture, even though they've said that we need to increase food production in order to solve starvation. The status quo is colonial, because encourage countries to rely on more developed antitrust regimes while denying them the ability to sue in the United States, which means the affirmative provides a necessary, which means that only the affirmative provides a necessary remedy. Now, even if you think they're winning a link argument, the alternative does not solve any. The alternative does not solve any of their links, because it does not have a means of addressing cartel practices. It does not have a means of reversing agricultural liberalization, and even if it is solvent, it causes transition conflicts that make all of their impacts inevitable. their alternative is vague, apparently mutually exclusive with the case. So everything we've said in the 1AC is a disadvantage to it, and they haven't made a meaningful distinction between the alternative and the forms of socialism that are critiqued by the McAfee evidence. The McAfee evidence cites a number of empirics, including Venezuela, which can also logically be extended to the Soviet Union, Cambodia, China, and Russia as examples of socialism being incredibly terrible for terrible for quality of life and socioeconomic well-being. In addition to the environment, the affirmative is an impact turn to all of this, because if their argument is just that extraterritorial application leads U.S. companies to be predatory towards the global South, and only the predatory towards the global South, and all of that is amplified in a world of converging transition wars and crisis and conflict. Anything else, Graham?
I think just like shape sustainability through our internal link. It's a problem of cartels, not
Yeah,
capitalism.
shape sustainability through our internal link, because we've read a bunch of great 1AC evidence that indicates that only market competition through antitrust is able to disrupt barriers to economic efficiency, innovation, which is the most meaningful, practical route to the distribution and increases in wealth, and something that only the affirmative can solve. Good debate, Trinity.
Good debate.
The neg doc is sent.
Coleman, I just want to make sure you're there.
Hey y'all.
Because I don't have my audio on.
Sorry, since I have not a response in the chat, I'm the person streaming the round. Is everybody okay with decisions being streamed, or should I turn the streaming off now?
I'm okay with it. Kayla's okay with it. So Coleman, I guess, is. I'm trying to make sure that Coleman's here too.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here and good with it, Irma.
Okay, excellent. We got all the debaters. This is a 2-1 decision for the affirmative from Kansas.
I voted neg. I thought that the neg one and impact terms the app model of development. I think that there's kind of two reasons for me. One is that I think throughout the debate there's a layer to the negative argument that is not answered very well, which is the sort of imperialism argument about the imposition of the Western model of development and how that drives rather than resolving the impacts that you're going for. I think that they're pretty good on explaining this and the sort of drive to impose Western economic principles, kind of drive conflict, causing bunch of impacts. And I just didn't think the app ever had kind of a counter narrative to that. Like, I was waiting for the app to be like, no, you don't understand, but you basically said that hedge is bad, that hedge is really good. And I didn't get any of that. The second, I thought that you might get me on the second advantage of my idea that only the app solves resource cartels. The problem that I came to with that is that I don't really have an impact to that outside of food wars, and I ended up thinking the second big thing, the second reason I voted neg was that I thought they were winning in that turn to food wars because I think they're winning the Western liberalization bad argument. Because this Michael evidence is quite good, and that they're definitely selling it, and I don't have a great response on point to this kind of narrative in the winning hour. I do think the McAfee part is the answer, but unfortunately, I think the negative evidence is a little bit better on the question of sustainability of the model. I think, for example, that I don't really have a response to arguments, even if you write out some of the agricultural techniques that are promoted by your evidence, that rural farmers aren't able to actively use those, and only the model endorsed by the alternative kind of enables self-sufficiency. The kind of China model is bad evidence. I think it's more polemic than descriptive. The negative has like 3 cards on this, and I thought they were doing a little bit better on the characterization of how the agricultural model works, or if it doesn't work by driving monoculture over industrialization that kind of wrecks the environment, which I think is also an impact that they have some traction on. I didn't think the fermentation made much sense by the end of the debate because I thought there were a bunch of impact terms. I did think, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is some of the difference with other than the alternative debate is pretty muddy on both sides. I think the app might be winning some of their socialism fields and is bad argument. My issue was primarily that I don't think you're doing a great job contextualizing the argument to the linguistic impact that they're going for. And so that ties back into the stuff about agriculture for me, because I think you can be right about socialism having problems, but I think the negative overall that I've had on socialist development models being good. And then I guess the only other thing I'll really say is that, well, I thought about voting, I think the trio is good on some of the impacts of the development advancements. You're good on parts of this, but I can't sort of separate it out from the rest of the debate because you're going to link it about sustainable development. And it seems to me like from the even out of the prospects early in the debate, they had you on this being largely a question of equitable distribution, which is, again, something I thought they were winning. But, I thought it was very close.
Okay, I'll go now. This is a round where I thought there are really pretty good reasons you could find to vote either F or negative, and I'm not surprised that it's a 2-1 and it was an excellent debate. The resource stuff, I didn't really quite filter it as saying this is primarily or solely an ag impact. I kind of thought that there was a lot of resource extraction on the internal link chain to this, and so I just didn't quite put it in the same grouping of it. The 2NR doesn't go to this page. There is a reference on the alt extension. It's kind of like an alt solves resources wars that I couldn't really trace too much of anything. After closely reading it, I thought like the Tilsey argument, the card is like a little interactive with it, and maybe the Harvey card is a little interactive, but like how voting negative either undermines resource demand or causes resource, extraction to occur in more equitable, less conflictual ways. I just kind of felt like I had to do way too much explaining to make either of those two things happen, and so I needed a little bit more direct discussion of it. And I do think that the alt was kind of in this weird middle place between like we're a little bit defending the status quo, which is the Chinese model, a little bit defending the alt. And I kind of feel like you would have been in a better position to go firmly on one of the two. I actually think you should have gone much more firmly on the apparently defending like the Chinese model as it, and then try to use the transition war stuff the other way back against them and say liberalization is itself the transition away or something like that. I thought that would have been a clever move with the epithet that's basically in the round anyway, because you're not doing a great deal with the alt card the way that it's described now. I also thought that there was a real difference for me between like the Dresner card and the Smith card. I kind of thought that the Said card that you read as sort of the transition war answer was like a lot more relevant to the Dresner card than the Smith card, which the Smith, I mean, like the Dresner card is tagged the transition war implication, but it's more of an economic interdependence argument and less of a like full-on replacement, which is another reason why I think it would have been far better for the alt to kind of get framed more as like the squo's the alt almost. A couple of thoughts on some of the negatives, best shots, and why I didn't quite vote on them. One of the most intriguing things that I just didn't process until I was reading the cards was like what's up with the Saito card, which is basically an intrastate war thing, and it's got some interesting comparative language, but I kind of thought the comparative language was like comparative language over like the natures of genocide as opposed to like something that made me think that intrastate wars actually outweigh like future great power kinds of things. And so it didn't quite do for me what it needed to, but boy, do I think like if I had processed that and then like had a kind of a couple of like, here's how interstate stuff intersects with all the conflict stuff, I think there was like some real potential in that card. The environment stuff actually gave me the greatest pause because I thought that the 2AR on the McMichael card kind of characterized it as food, but it's like food, it's also environment, and it's environment from our agricultural model. But there are two or three things that the affirmative does that I thought made this not quite as devastating. The first one is the McAfee card says like new ag tech and specifically DNA tech will reduce the ecological footprint. And then I also thought that the resource wars stuff is explained, and the card says it as being kind of like, here's what climate pressure actually culminates in, and here's how our management strategy intercedes against the terminal impact of it. And so I just kind of found myself thinking like, it's an environment impact, but to get it a little bit more outside of climate into something like one of the many potentially concrete things in this card, you know, amplify that maybe just a little bit more. And then the Harvey card is pretty good, but I just needed like 2-hour reading guidance on like how I should be thinking about it in a comparative impact sense. So I think I agree with Michaela. I thought the negative was better on kind of like the big picture narrative frame. I just thought that there were a couple of affirmative impact claims that I didn't feel like the narrative frame quite disrupted for me as much. So that's what I want to add for right now.
Ermo, can I have you mute? Sorry. Okay, can people hear me now? People okay to hear me now? Okay. All right. So for me, probably the biggest obstacle I had for the negative is I do think that the alt explanation is a problem. And I agree with Ermo's characterization that you kind of have two different kind of explanations for how the alternative plays out. I think maybe I come down on the other side of, I think, well, actually, no, I think there's a consistent explanation of these arguments that makes sense to me, because I think you have arguments about kind of the China model and how it empowers kind of a localized production that could be successful. There's a couple things that are missing explanations, either in the block of the 2&R that I think would be enough for me to kind of overcome kind of my resistance to the alt's ability to overcome some of the problems that currently exist. The first is I don't think that there's a really strong coherent argument made by the negative at any point in the debate as to kind of really how the alternative addresses the current existence of cartels and how they operate in those countries currently. Like, I think that's just a major obstacle. I think the AF has a uniqueness claim here that cartels exist now and that they've kind of unleveled the playing field in those particular areas that I'm not 100% certain what the alt does to resolve that particular claim. I think a large part of the alt requires an empowerment of local farmers and businesses to be able to operate in ways that are socially and environmentally sustainable. But I think the AF is right in the claim that the cartels and businesses prevent that success of those individuals from succeeding. And it begs the question of how the alt is able to overcome that structural barriers that allows them to succeed. I think the 2NC Nielsen evidence is actually pretty good in explaining the potential of those localized movements. If they were to exist and how they would be able to reverse some of those claims. But I think if the AF is correct in their claim kind of the existence of cartels in the short term, I don't know how you overcome that. I also think that the AF is maybe slightly ahead in the question of whether or not there would be intervening conflicts that would happen in the short term. I don't know that those transition wars are sufficient enough to kind of resolve those, but I think there's a secondary claim in there in the one in our evidence about how kind of if there were conflicts to happen in the short term, that it would cause even the most ardent socialists to kind of give up some of their environmentally sustainable practices, which again is I think is a second component to complicate the ability of the alt to ever kind of actualize itself in a way that is valuable or productive. I also thought one of the other problems with the 2NR is I thought that a lot of your explanations in the block kind of relied a lot on the application of this particularly to China. And I thought kind of China became kind of less of a focus in the 2NR in ways that I thought were like advantageous for you in the block. And I think filtering some of your arguments through that model would have been helpful and useful. As it was, I think the AF wins that there is a risk of their kind of providing access to antitrust forums to people in these particular areas would at least resolve some risk of the resource the resource wars argument, which I think is the most consistent and well explained impact argument throughout the debate. I do think that there is a risk, perhaps, of kind of the larger risk that kind of opening up these markets may cause some environmental problems. But I do think that the 1AR evidence that they read about the inputs to agricultural production, which is, I think, the place where this has been explained the most throughout the debate, as well as kind of the inevitable collapse through resource extraction, provides some terminal defense to the claim of whether or not the environmental collapse is inevitable in the first place. So I think that they win, that there is a risk that the reversing of those cartels in those areas is necessary to not only solve the kind of inevitable environmental collapse, but also the kind of short-term risk of conflict that occurs in the short term, and that the alternative is more likely to result in a transitionary conflict than the AF is in that context. So yeah, I don't think the alt gets to resolve those claims, and I think that there's only a chance the AF probably does resolve some sort of short-term conflict that exists, and it probably solves for some level of resource wars that will inevitably happen in a way that I just don't think the alternative can do, and outweighs the risk of the kind of generic imperialism impact argument that you may win at the end of the debate. And that's where I came down. I thought it was incredibly close. Took me a long time. I read all the cards. I get why it was a 2-1. I think it's real close. And just some different readings, some of these evidence and some prioritization, I think could have flipped this debate very easily the other way. But incredible debating on both sides.
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for that feedback.
Thank you all for judging.
Yeah, thanks.
Good luck, Kansas.